Hello and welcome to Bulletsponge. I'm back, much like that trip to the toilet you need after your first morning coffee, and today it's going to be a little bit different to my first video where I talked through my favourite games of 2020. Today I'm going to start on a series of videos that I'm calling Bulletsponge Scrub Down. I'm going to be talking through the beginning of one of my favourite game franchises ever, Halo. Halo Combat Evolved was developed by Bungie, and it actually started its life as an isometric real-time strategy game, not too dissimilar from the eventual release of Halo Wars. It was developed in the same engine as one of Bungie's previous games called Myth, and it actually spent a long time at the start of its life in this very same perspective. Bungie actually pitched the idea of Halo Combat Evolved to Steve Jobs at Apple. Jobs agreed to premiere the game at the Macworld Expo of 1999, and it was announced on stage to be released at the same time on Windows and on Mac. At this point, there was actually barely a game. After the announcement and in the depths of development, Bungie was really struggling financially. They approached Take-Two, who now own Rockstar and 2K, who developed all the 2K sports game series, Red Dead Redemption and GTA. The financial support that they received from selling to Take-Two wasn't actually enough. Bungie's executive vice president, Peter Tamte, approached Microsoft, and a relationship was formed between the two companies. Microsoft went on to actually announce the acquisition of Bungie and their IP Halo. Take-Two, on the other hand, ended up with Bungie's other intellectual properties, Myth and Oni. At the time, Microsoft was actually well on its way to releasing its first console, the Xbox. You know, that big giant black box that has the X in the middle of it.
It is truly the future of video games, and I'm very excited to simply be a part of it if you smell what The Rock is cooking.
And Halo just became its front and center release. Microsoft announced their acquisition of Bungie on the 19th of June 2000. Halo actually released on the 15th of November 2001. Now my maths isn't fantastic, but I'm pretty sure that leaves a total of 17 months for Bungie to finish the game before the Xbox released. At the time of the acquisition, Halo had actually moved to being a third-person shooter. This happened when the developers were playing around with the perspective that the player had on the characters they were controlling, and they really liked the immersiveness that they got from zooming right in on the character. At E3 in 2000, a trailer was shown that had the Marines fighting the Covenant and Master Chief himself showing up at the end. Only he wasn't actually the Master Chief yet. He was known as the Cyborg.
The drop zone is clear. I repeat, the drop zone is clear.
Let's roll! Get the hell out of here, Lieutenant!
Your destruction is the will of the gods, and we are their instrument.
Go to hell.
Following the trailer at E3, one of Bungie's founders, Jason Jones, actually pushed for the game to become a first-person shooter to make it suit the Xbox's Duke controller better. We all remember the Duke. Such a short time to release, crunch was happening. Bungie had to cancel a lot of features that they originally planned in the game, like destructible environments and an open world map, kinda like what we got a taste of in the mission The Silent Cartographer later on in the game. Voiceover sessions were undertaken with barely finished scripts. The scores were finished in unbelievably tight timescales. And multiplayer was even completely revamped in the game 4 months before release because they didn't think it was actually fun at all. But they persevered, and eventually we got the release of Halo Combat Evolved. Halo's story actually begins before Halo Combat Evolved's release in the novel The Fall of Reach. This novel tells the story of the Spartan program that the Master Chief actually came from and the eventual glassing of the planet of Reach. This is the Covenant's first attack on the humans, and we actually get the playthrough perspective of this in the later release game Halo Reach. Halo Combat Evolved begins aboard the Pillar of Autumn. This ship has just left the Battle of Reach and carries the Master Chief and Captain Keyes on board. The ship leaves hyperspace and finds itself beside the Halo that the game series is actually named after. The Covenant attack the ship, and this forces Captain Keyes to give the ship's AI Cortana to Master Chief so he can escape to prevent the Covenant from finding the other human settlements like Earth. After landing on the Halo and rescuing some survivors, the Chief learns that Captain Keyes was actually captured by the Covenant. The Chief rescues Keyes from a Covenant ship, and we learn that the Covenant actually planned to use the Halo as a weapon. Keyes and Master Chief split up, and the Master Chief finds the control room of the Halo. Here, Cortana learns the true purpose of the Halo. Enter the Flood. Halo actually takes a bit of a turn at this point, and you spend the next little while fighting this parasite called the Flood. The Flood actually just acts like any sort of zombie that you've seen, attacks a person and takes over their body. At this point, 343 Guilty Spark has shown up. He's the caretaker of the Halo, and he takes Master Chief to the control room and tells him the only way to stop the Flood is to use the Halo. Cortana actually stops him before he can do this and tells him that the purpose of the Halo is to wipe out all sentient life, starve the Flood, as the Forerunners who built the Halo believed this was the only way to stop them. Master Chief and Cortana form a plan to use the Pillar of Autumn as a bomb to destroy the Halo. On their way to do this, they find that Keyes has actually been taken over by the Flood and not looking in a good way. Chief the codes to override the reactors of the ship. Master Chief uses this to blow up the ship and the Halo, and all the aliens and soldiers that were left on it. The Chief narrowly escapes, luckily enough, and says one of his most famous lines before the game ends.
Halo, it's finished.
No, I think we're just getting started.
The iconic music of Halo was actually composed by a gentleman called Martin O'Donnell and his company Total Audio. O'Donnell was given a brief to give a feeling of ancient mystery. He and his fellow composer Michael Salvatore decided to use Gregorian chanting as their main inspiration, and we ended up with that famous choral piece that we all know and love. O'Donnell tried to score the game around the idea of the game actually changing dynamics. He designed the music to be used sparingly and actually used as a weapon to tell the player how to feel at a certain time. This is similar to the techniques that we see in modern cinema today. O'Donnell really nailed the score for this game, so much so that the next two games, Halo 2 and Halo 3, had their music based off this original score. That's a game series spanning 2 generations of consoles and 6 years. Bungie wanted the factions in Halo Combat Evolved to be distinct from each other, not just in how they looked, but also in their architecture, their tech and their weapons. The Covenant had laser guns with curved designs and flashy lights across their arsenal, much like the Energy Sword, while the humans used projectile weapons which have a much more blockier look to them and resemble what we know from the military today. Less flashy, more grunty. The structures you find around the Halo were built by the Forerunners. This is a race you don't actually meet in the game, but their buildings are quite angular and full of lights, finding a kind of middle ground between the 2 previous factions. And then there's the Flood, just this brown organic matter that went everywhere. Grotesque and scary, especially in the horror movie inspired scene that introduces them. All this combined to make this visually and audibly stunning game that really stood out at the time of its release. The release of Halo Combat Evolved changed the face of video games forever. Its exclusive release on the Xbox meant there was a new player in town, and Microsoft came into the fray, ready to fight the might of Sony and Nintendo. The franchise of Halo has seen some rough years lately, and Halo Infinite The next game in the series has had a rocky start before its release. Bungie itself is seeing massive success with its new series, Destiny. As you play Destiny or Destiny 2, you can feel the history and pedigree behind it that came from the same developers of Halo Combat Evolved. Okay, that's the end of my Bulletsponge scrub down of Halo Combat Evolved. Hope you enjoyed it. I do intend to go ahead and do these for each of the games in the series, probably as far as Halo ODST or Halo Reach. My next video will be on Halo 2, but keep an eye out around May time. I'll be releasing a preview of Jason Schreier's next book, Press Reset. If you're liking what you see, like, subscribe. I'll put a link to my social media profiles down below this video. Be sure to follow it if you want to see some crappy photoshops or what I'm actually playing at the moment. Thank you.